Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
What's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I am your host, Ryan Holmes, and I am happily joined by co-founder and CEO Reid Meyer. And today we are going to discuss some of the latest topics happening on the NCAA level. And the number one topic that people are talking about, and no, not ad revenue or anything else, it's the NCAA changing rules so that college students can have 5 years instead of four. Um, there's some gray area in there that we'll discuss. And, obviously right now it's not so far outside of the rules that people are going, that crazy of it. It's kind of the nuanced things that they have been proposing within this rule set that are the changes that they're looking at making. Because right now, I can't remember how many, I think it's what you have 5 years to get 4 years of eligibility is what they usually tell you. However, there's obviously Olympic red shirts that go into it. There's medical red shirts. There's the COVID stuff. I think Miami right now has a player on their team that has had multiple medical hardships. So he has been playing for, I believe, 9 years at this point. So there's been a lot that has changed on the NCAA level, and they're going to look to make more changes. And obviously, all of these are predicated on that House versus NCAA case as well, that is kind of wrapped up in this. But first, the headline of red shirt rule changes and things like that. Reid, I want to get your take on those just to start. When you first saw this headline, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have two thoughts on this. The first one being I've I've got to actually kind of hand it to the NCAA and to Charlie and the boys. Like they're at least trying to do things.
Mhm.
They're looking at what's going on now. I may not always agree with how they're choosing to handle certain things or how they're changing things. There's still some stuff they're trying to defend that they really shouldn't be when it comes to legal proceedings. But there is an attempt to try and evolve and adapt the NCAA, which I can really appreciate. The more I see them churn out changes and churn out propositions to councils within Division One, Division Two, the more I realize how much Mark Emmert really just made a paycheck by sitting his big body in front of the road of progress and just kind of being there. So on the front, I really do appreciate that. As far as the fifth year of eligibility is concerned, I like it. I think that in my mind, it's yeah, maybe they're using it as a bargaining chip to try and keep kids in school longer. And yeah, it's probably more geared towards the revenue sports to try and convince kids that you can stay in and make money in college, not have to leave, let's say basketball, for example, to go to the NBA. You can sort of extend your lifeline in college. I see it on the academic and application side as, man, I know of so many football players that are able to go and get their masters whenever they're in school because they're just playing for that amount of time. They have that extra year. It
Mhm.
allows them to take some summer classes while they're there for training. It allows them to take into that master's curriculum. Other sports are now going to have that same opportunity. Usually you
Mhm.
have would have to have gone and done like a grad assistant role. A lot of times people will go and do that. They'll coach for a team, they'll make nothing, they'll pay their way, or they'll get a subsidized education, which is great. Now you get to stay engaged with the sport that you love feasibly, and you get to kind of extend that academic lifeline for yourself or lifetime for
Yeah.
yourself. So for me, on that front, um, I really like it in that respect. I'd love to hear from your end. I know it sounds like wrestling and football are the two sports that have kind of had this. I imagine is the Olympic red shirt, is that kind of the reason for this on the wrestling sides of things? I'm curious your feeling on the athletic side, on kind of what your feelings are here.
Yeah, so football and wrestling are the two that right now they have the red shirt rule that is going to be expanded to all sports. So in football, you're allowed to play in, I believe it's 5 games and still keep your red shirt. In wrestling, you're allowed to participate in five, as we put it in wrestling, you're allowed to participate attached 5 times, because there's a number of open tournaments and things like that where a redshirt athlete can enter and not wrestle attached, where it means you're not representing the school, and in the past, when you were an unattached wrestler wrestling in an open, you weren't allowed to travel with the team. You weren't allowed to accept any sort of like travel funding or any help to get to the tournament or anything like that. Obviously, I mean, let's call it what it is. That's still going to go on because your coach wants you to wrestle in this open tournament. So they're going to figure out a way to get you there. And, whether it is riding with a parent or assistant coach or whoever else, they're going to figure out a way to get you there. But when these rules changed, specifically in wrestling, it allowed these athletes to travel with the team, to, accept basically all the same perks that the attached wrestlers were accepting and being able to benefit from, but it wouldn't count against them eligibility wise. And then on top of that, like I said, they can also wrestle attached in 5 different events. So say that's, 3 dual meets, like 3 big dual meets where they feel that the new hot prospect can really help them against a certain team. For instance, last year with Iowa had a couple of freshmen that wrestled in up to their 5 allotted dates that they get, and they were able to help the team. But they were able to also continue to keep their red shirt. So they still have 4 years of wrestling eligibility left. So those are the changes that have really happened. And like I said, in football, you can also do the same thing where, say, a guy gets hurt and the next guy up in line is a red shirt guy that can come in for a game or two, or up to 5 games while your starter is hurt. You're going to put him in the game and allow him to help the team, as opposed to a guy that might not be as good as him. So that's how they've been using it. But also, the good part of this is from an athletic development standpoint, because call it what it is, athletes, when they come out of high school, there's very few of them that are that Alabama wide receiver who at 17 is reclassified to be a freshman in high school, or to be a freshman in college instead of a senior in high school, and is running all over the field and scoring multiple touchdowns a game. He's a rarity. A lot more athletes need kind of that grace period to kind of get their feet wet a little bit. So that's really where these red shirt rule came from for football as well as wrestling, is to get used to that type of physicality and to be able to get some of that experience and really kind of take your lumps, so to speak, instead of getting into being a full-time athlete as a redshirt freshman and taking your lumps and having a terrible year, and maybe it screws up your career, right? Now you can allow these wrestlers to have as many open tournaments as you want unattached, and then as well as the 5 attached dates that they also have. So it really helps more with athlete development. It really helps them kind of get their feet wet and figure out what type of athlete they're going to be on the college level, how things really work on the college level, adjusting to game speed, adjusting to the physicality, like I said. So there's a number of benefits from this redshirt rule. So, I think everyone is kind of clamoring about it because it's only been happening in 2 sports, and they don't realize that it has been happening in those 2 sports. Because when it came out, it was a really, really big thing, and wrestling's been using it for a while, and football's been using it for a while as well. And you don't see it happening. You don't. It doesn't. Especially in football. In wrestling, we see it happen every year, where they're like, all right, we're gonna make sure that we're putting our red shirt in the lineup for this match, this match, this match, this tournament, whatever else. Like, they are mapping out a plan for their redshirt freshmen so that they know where they're going to be. In football, it doesn't really happen as much, where they're putting in a redshirt guy and allowing him, or at least if it does happen, there's 11 other guys on the field, 20, 21 other guys out on the field. So you don't realize that it's really happening. He's able to get kind of lost in the shuffle and lost in the mix. So I think by extending this, I think it's a great idea, allowing basketball players to do it, baseball, softball. I mean, think about it. I mean, for you, for instance, a baseball pitcher comes in, you allow him to get absolutely shelled as an 18-year-old, and you're like, okay, now you know what it's like being here. Now you know what kind of adjustments you want to make. Now you know what, your nerves feel like being out on the mound. There's a lot of things that you can take away from it. So from a learning standpoint, I think it's great. I love that they're looking at extending it. But obviously that's not the only thing that's happening with this rule set. But your thoughts on expanding this and looking at it from an athletic, not just an athletic standpoint, but from an academic one as well.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's more opportunities for kids to stay in school longer and to just maximize those benefits, right? If you're going to be there, hey, keep taking classes, right? If you can walk out of that university with 2 degrees instead of one, especially the way that a lot of schools are managing their degree plans now, if you're in a pathway and you know what you want to do, this happens a lot of times in business. Occasionally, engineering degrees will have it. I'm sure you can do it in more of the humanities as well. They've streamlined these degree plans based on what you've done in high school as far as APs, credits, things like that. Man, you can get that master's in a year. Like you don't need that second year a lot of times. You can streamline that process and get that. So from an academic standpoint, I think it's great. And on the athletics piece, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I think about, excuse me, my freshman year at Tech. I mean, shoot, man, I burned a year of eligibility, and I think I logged like an inning and a half when it was all said and done. And it was basically exactly to your point. It was like, all right, you're going to go pitch against the big boys now, and you're going to see what it feels like for a 21-year-old man to hit your 17, 18-year-old pitch. And we just need to have that wake up call as a kid. And I think giving kids an opportunity to have that experience in that first year, even if, I mean, I see this as a world where if they open this up for everybody, those initial tournaments that you play in the season that are non-conference, things like that, to me, those become almost like a preseason for some of these
Hmm.
teams. You can throw in a bunch of guys, you can let them get a couple innings, you can test the waters, you can see, just get everyone exposed to what that feels like. Get exposed to a 95-mile-an-hour pitch. Get exposed to the 6'8" guy absolutely blocking your stuff whenever you go up for a layup. Like, just see what that feels like in these other sports. And that's going to help you improve. Because, yeah, I mean, we all practice and we all work together, but from playing football, like that's not the same as somebody sitting across from you that you're never going to see again, absolutely trying to destroy you because that's what
Hmm.
they're trying to do on their team. Like that's something you just have to feel and you have to experience. And I think if you give kids an opportunity to do that, not only is it going to help them be prepared for the next years that they're going to compete, but while they're in school, they're going to get so many more educational benefits so long as they decide to stay in there. So for me, this feels like a very natural, yeah, of course we should do this. We've tested it in wrestling, we've tested it in football. It works. There's no, I don't know of any horror stories that are coming out from this. It's just giving kids more opportunities. I mean, I think about even, I can't even believe how excited everybody got when Arch Manning came out for like 3 snaps in Texas football last year when he redshirted. And like, to your point, that's the only person that I can think of in recent memory who like I knew was going out there in a
Hmm.
redshirt capacity. Like it had more to do with the fact that his last name was Manning and less to do with the fact that it was a redshirt situation. So it doesn't affect the game at all. It just allows coaches and kids to get more exposed to what this thing is before they really dive in and commit.
And that's the other part of it. And I we'd be stupid to think that there wasn't a dollars and cents part of this as well, right? When you look at the marketing that goes in, and like I said, in wrestling, when we know of a potential very big matchup with the newest hot commodity coming out of high school against a returning NCAA champion, right? To say, okay, well, let's see how our young 17, 18-year-old does against this 21-year-old who's been on the scene for a long time, has been at the top of the podium. We market that, right? We look at it and we say, you do not want to miss this. This is must watch, right? This is another way for content creators like myself to get on a microphone or to write an article or whatever else and tell you why this is important and to showcase the fact that there is a very big thing that's about to happen, for lack of a better term. Like it is something that we're not always going to see. And there's, for instance, I can tell you from experience when I had seen last year that his name is Gabe Arnold, that Gabe Arnold was going to be getting some time in the Iowa wrestling lineup. I looked at their schedule and I said, here is where, and I wrote an article about it. Here is where we would love to see Gabe Arnold wrestling during the year. And here's where we could potentially see him wrestle during the year and the guys that he would hit. And it was always, he can hit an NCAA champion here. He can hit an All-American here. Here's a guy he can wrestle the #1 ranked wrestler here. And it was a piece of content that went out during the year that you would normally do for your top dogs to say, here's when, your top dogs are going to have the most competition at either this tournament or this dual meet. But we were doing it for a guy that was not even going to be in the NCAA tournament at the end of the year. That was only going to be wrestling like a handful of times. But it was a marketing ploy. It was a way to get more butts in seats. It was a way to get more people to tune in and watch and to gain more fans and to have more ticket sales and literally everything, right? So from an NCAA standpoint, there's no downside of this. It gives your teams and your schools and these conferences more marketing leverage, especially if rev share is going to be that next hot commodity. Now, within this entire thing, and I want to move on to the next part of this, is they're also looking at getting rid of national letters of intent. And what a national letter of intent does, for people that don't know, and I'm sure people do, but that essentially shuts off your recruiting. Your recruiting doesn't shut off when you put a tweet out there that says, I'm committed to go to UT and, I'm shutting down my recruitment. You're crazy to think that your recruitment truly shuts down when you just say a couple of words. They are impressionable 18-year-old kids and they decommit, they change their mind every single day. I mean, they can't even figure out what pair of pants to wear to school on certain days. You think that they're going to be able to hold up their end of the bargain on a commitment, right? Like it doesn't really happen. And getting rid of national letters of intent, and they would then, it would change a lot of things with recruiting, because if they get rid of it, their new national letter of intent would be approved around, I think, and I got to do a little bit more reading into it, but as I was reading some different articles and things before we came on, it would then be their new national letter of intent would then be tied to like their financial aid and their scholarship and anything else. Because you have to sign on a dotted line for that as well. So it's more so when you accept that entire package, not just your athletic scholarship. Because the NIL or the NLI is when you are accepting an athletic scholarship. That's really all it really is. There's no financial aid in there. There's nothing else. So with the new rev share and with how that's going to be paid out in 2025, 2026, it's, in my opinion, going to start looking like NFL contracts where your scholarship is in there, how it's broken down between you're going to get, you're saying you're going to a $75,000 a year school, you're going to get 25 grand for athletics. You're going to get, X amount of money for financial aid. You're going to get books. You're going to get this, you're going to get that. And it's going to break it all down. And then they're going to also have your rev share or what you're being paid for NIL. So it's going to look more like an NFL contract of incentive based type things and what you're getting as opposed to what it looks like now. Do you think that pivoting away from a national letter of intent is a good move, or would you much rather them continue to have the signing day period, which has become the biggest fanfare that is in NCAA sports?
Well, I will say I don't think they're going to get rid of signing day. I think to your point, they've built a whole show around it. They've built a whole culture around it. I think whatever they do, I imagine some of those dates are still going to remain the same. I know they've talked about getting rid of like the spring transfer portal for football and some things like that, but everything else seems a bit. No, I think the adaptation of the national letter of intent, whether it's good or bad, I think it's necessary. I think the way that they're starting to move towards, exactly to your point, there's a lot more factors involved when we talk about kids going to schools, especially for the more, revenue generating models, right? Football nowadays, schools that are engaging in a lot of NIL, name, image, and likeness, NLI, NIL, it just gets, I'm going to just spell them out because that gets confusing.
I know, that's why I
Um,
started doing it too.
yeah, I think it's necessary to sort of adapt that to fit those pieces. And to your point, I think it's important for folks to know, and you explained really well, like the National Letter of Intent, it is a document that is signed only by Division I and Division II athletes at this time that are signing an athletics scholarship. So it is essentially an agreement between you and the school to come to the school for that amount of money that you've agreed to on the athletics aid package. So it really is, it's one arm of that full package that you would be looking at from from a school standpoint. And so to integrate that one arm into the rest of the body and to say, hey, this needs to all be looked at in one big group essentially, so we understand what the full scope of this commitment is and what the full scope of this requirement is and funds are, to me makes logical sense. I think before the NCAA was operating very much in its own silo. I think now it's trying to integrate more with universities and its member schools to kind of build that relationship back up again after the explosion that occurred over the last couple of years.
Hmm.
And I think it benefits them. I think it benefits them. I think it benefits kids. I think, if they do it, in my opinion, the right way, then you're going to have a lot more transparency in those agreements, and families are going to know exactly what they're signing up for. They're going to know what the athletics component is. They're going to know what the financial aid component is. They're going to know what the merit scholarship component is. And I think if those elements are included in that new agreement, I think that makes a lot of sense. I also think it makes sense probably to expand who signs those agreements, especially for schools that are opting into the new revenue sharing model if that ends up getting ratified. Because if you're going to have those roster limits, now we have to be a little bit more over the table about who's on the roster, who's on the team, and who's competing in practices. So having that sort of specific NLI, even if it says $0 on the athletic side, if you're coming in as a just a rostered athlete that isn't going to have any athletic aid, you need to have that sort of documented, I think, from a team perspective and have that sort of shored up. I think it just makes life easier for reporting if they're going to need to have roster limits. I think it makes it easier for kids. But to your point, I think keeping that element of the national letter of intent there, and at least in some signing capacity, also helps create some rigidity on the commitment sides of things. Because it's the biggest gripe that so many people have that exist in this space. When you have those verbal commitments on the kids side, on the coaches side, on the admin side, it's so loosey-goosey and it's so non-committal on such an aggressive scale that like it's just frustrating. You have
Hmm.
kids that think they have something, it goes away in the heartbeat. You have coaches that think they have something, it goes away in a heartbeat. And it's become this weird, almost like toxic relationship game where like everyone thinks that they can do that to the other person because, oh, well, this it happened to this person over here, or they'll do it to you first, or whatever. And there's an element of that comes into play during sort of the courting process when you're going through the recruiting phase. But if we can create opportunities for kids that know they want to go somewhere and coaches that know they want to have a kid, if we can just ink that and make it a thing, and then everyone's protected, that to me is a positive. And not only are you protected, but families now have a transparent look at, okay, this is what my cost commitment is going to be for this first year of school. I now know what that looks like. It's not a situation where, because what happens to a lot of kids and where we have a lot of issues is kids will commit to schools, especially if they're not having headcount sports and they have to, there's a percentage involved on the athletics aid part. A lot of times kids will commit to that element. They'll apply to the school, and then the academic aid that was maybe promised or inferred to them doesn't end up panning out on the scholarship side because coaches and athletic departments aren't in charge of that. That's admissions, that's
Hmm.
academics, that's the other side of the house. So when those two things don't talk together, now you have situations where kids are potentially dumping out of agreements, not because they're bad kids, but because when they get the real numbers, they go, ooh, this isn't what I thought I was going to have to pay. And I don't know if I can afford this. And for the
I've
big
seen that happen
hitters,
before.
exactly. And like for the big hitters and the one percenters, quote unquote, that go and play these, it's not going to be an issue because there's going to be NIL involved. There's going to
Oh
be,
yeah.
a headcount money involved. Like we're not talking about those kids. Those kids are fine, going to be fine. Not a big deal. Get a lawyer, do that. For all those other kids that want to compete, for those 98 for 99% of kids, that's where this becomes a real benefit in my mind. And so I think it's, I'm curious to see what they truly end up proposing because right now, you've read the same articles I have. It's very much just like, it's going to be different. It's going to be
Hmm.
innovative. And you're like, all right, I don't that. Can you show me a document? Can you show me parameters? Like, I want to see that before I necessarily say it's good or bad, but I will say confidently it's necessary.
Yeah. And there's two things that I want to pinpoint on that, I think the first is something that I don't think it was an emphasis for you, but it is something that as a journalist, I started to emphasize and a lot of other journalists started to put emphasis on is adding the word verbal to commitment when it comes to these kids. And because for the longest time, people would just say, oh, he's committed to go there, he's committed to go there, especially even when you're writing it, right? And or even when we're on, on podcasts like this, we're saying, oh, he's committed, she's committed, whatever. We started to emphasize the word verbal, or he's verbally committed to go to Stanford, she's verbally committed to go to Clemson because of this wild, like you said, toxic relationship culture of getting them before they get you, sort of a thing of, okay, I got to make sure that I'm still covering all my bases. And if I'm going to get out of here, I'm going to get out of here and I'm out unscathed. And, I didn't sign anything and I didn't accept anything and, whatever, whatever. Right. So, you said that and I was like, that's, the differentiation has become more emphasized over, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years, where you are saying verbal commit as opposed to committed, to really just be specific when it comes to how this athlete is tied to the school. Secondly, all of the things that they're proposing to change is a byproduct of this new rev share deal. Because, as I said, national letter of intent is going to essentially go away. And it's all going to be tied in with your financial aid package, with your scholarship, with, your books, your room and board, all the bells and whistles. But the other part of it is also that rev share, that name, image, and likeness, as well as going to be tied into these contracts. And I think that's the big part of it is the NCAA is going to be the ones that are looking over these hundreds of thousands of contracts every single year and saying, this is what you offered this 5-star quarterback from here. This is what the quarterback that is a 5-star at this school is being offered. They're going to compare and contrast them. They're going to look at the nuance of them. And that's why I feel like the national letter of intent is going to be going away because before it was just, we're going to give you a full ride scholarship. We're going to give you a partial scholarship. You're going to get this, you're going to get that, you're going to get this. And that was all, and none of it was on the academic side. All of it was on the athletic side. But now with, national letter of intent going away, they are going to be, there's going to have to be a lot more transparency. As we already talked about, there's the dashboard where all of the NIL stuff is going to be being submitted. So looking into that on the dashboard is going to be huge. And then on top of that, the NCAA is truly going to be monitoring if each one of these schools is doing their due diligence when it comes to these offers and making sure that they aren't going over that 22%, I think, revenue share that they're allotted when it came to the new rev share, whenever it does get signed into the new rules, right? So that for me is when I look at it, you always have to have a follow the money aspect whenever these rules are changing because the line items are going to start looking differently when your accounting department is looking at it at the end of the year now. And the NCAA has already been cost billions of dollars in lawsuits that they want to not have happen again. They're going to continue to be sued by XYZ, but they want to make sure that they're not relitigating the same cases that they've already fought and lost or won or whatever else. So when I see, oh, we're going to expand our 5-year model for each one of these different sports, and you now have truly 5 years to get 4, and we're also going to get rid of national letter of intent. And there's some other things in here about prize money and everything else that isn't as, I think that's more Olympics friendly than it is anything. Because there's a lot of athletes, if you look at it, our athlete base at the Olympics is getting younger and younger. And there's going to be Olympic athletes that are going to want to stay eligible. I mean, Suni Lee went to Auburn this year or last year. She definitely got prize money for anything she was doing. And I think they probably had to put it under NIL. But in the past, there's, a wrestler, Kyle Snyder, who I believe it was 2016, 2017, I think it was, or maybe it was 2015, actually, when he won a world championship and couldn't really accept the prize money. It had to go into an escrow account that he couldn't touch until he was a graduate from Ohio State. So, the base of athletes is going to continue to get younger, and they're going to want the best athletes under the NCAA model in the first place. So if they're competing in the Olympics and they win a medal, they can accept that money, and then they can start to build around these athletes on the NCAA level and say, Olympic champion so and so is, at Auburn now. Very, very different, where it's more of a marketing thing as well. Like I said, follow the money. When they can start to build and market and NIL and do all these things for these different athletes, that's where all that stuff comes into play. But the headlines here are truly the red shirts being expanded to all sports, and then the national letter of intent then going away as well. To kind of wrap it up, what are your final thoughts on all the things that are being proposed? Do you think, I mean, obviously right now it's still in its infancy, where I think it was just last Friday they had a meeting to go over all these different bullet points. But what were your thoughts once you started digging in, and any thoughts that have come to mind since we've been discussing this for the last, 30 minutes?
Yeah, I think my biggest feelings or thoughts on it is that it all sounds very rational, which is not something I'm necessarily accustomed to feeling whenever I read about NCAA decisions and
Seems
legislation
progressive,
and things
yeah.
like that. Yeah, it seems like they're actually like trying to address problems that are happening and make it easier for folks to engage with college sport in not such a confining way, especially now that we've sort of redefined what college athletics is. And so it's I'm mostly encouraged. My gut reaction is still a little bit suspicious. I'm kind of waiting to hear what the actual proposal is on some of that stuff. But in all honesty, I mean, it feels like we've proposed some rules that seem very rational and seem very in line with the fact that the NCAA or college sports, I should say, not just the NCAA, are growing and adapting. And it is suspiciously refreshing to see the NCAA try and meet college sports where it's at instead of necessarily trying to pull it back down to where they might want it to be from a control standpoint. So overall, I think my feeling is encouraged. How about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think the professionalization of college sports is happening, and it's here to stay, and it's going to continue down this road, from NIL to adding the intercoms in college football helmets with the technology that they have. That's every single piece of professional sports that they have is going to start to matriculate down. From a business standpoint as well as from a playing standpoint, because the athletes are getting better and they're getting smarter, and the representation is now around them as well. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making logical legislation is so foreign to us, no matter what you're talking about. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is that, like you, I'm optimistic about it, and I want to see what else comes out of it. And the House case may be the catalyst for all of these things, but they're going about implementing these changes logically. And we didn't get into the House case, but that not the judge not accepting that is why we're getting these new steps, and why we're getting these things, because she wants actionable items to come out of it, not just the band-aid of saying we're going to change. She wants action, and the action so far, that, like I said, is the catalyst of a lot of these changes of, no more national letters of intent, and allowing athletes to have more time to get used to the college level of sports. And then also accepting prize money, which is, definitely a hat tip to our Olympic athletes that are from a younger base, or from an NCAA base, as we have more structure in the United States and other countries when it comes to our university sports. That is where a lot of these things are coming from. And like you said, it's logical. and it is progressive, and it's the way that things should be happening. Because if the offices are going to be having conversations about how much more the NCAA level is to be professionalized, you're going to have to change things. And you're going to have to change things logically and do what's right for the athlete. And I feel like for the first time, maybe not for the first time, but I feel like for the first time we're having a conversation where we feel as though these changes is what's right by the athlete, and like they had the athlete in mind when it came to doing these things. So I applaud them. Golf clap with it for right now. It's not a standing ovation, but I think that they're on the right path, and I love what they're doing. And I think that if they continue down this path, then we'll have true student athlete mindset when it comes to doing these things. But no, I think they are on the right path, and I think they can continue to go well. But Reid, as always, love the nuance that you bring from the admissions and academic standpoint, as you are the one digging into that side of it, and I'm digging into more of the athlete part of it. So love the cohesion that we've got. Always awesome to chop it up with you on some of these newer topics. We will be back again very, very soon, and we'll probably dig into that house case once again, as there will most likely be a lot more information that comes out in the coming days and weeks. We appreciate you guys listening. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're listening on your favorite podcast app, make sure you also hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss when another one of the A2A podcast episodes comes your way. We appreciate it.